Hi, I'm Tom Fate and I teach creative writing here at the college. Today I'll be joined by local writer Leigh Stein, who will be reading from her novel The Fallback Plan and also from a new collection of poetry, Dispatch from the Future. Leigh's a former student here at COD, so it's fun for us to have her back on campus. After she reads from both books, I'll have an opportunity to talk with her a little bit about her work.
I'm going to be reading from the first chapter of my book, which is called The Lilac Capital of the World, which is where I grew up in Lombard, Illinois. In June, the monsoons hit Bangladesh. Chinese police discovered slaves in a brickwork factory who couldn't be sent home because they were too traumatized to remember anything but their own names, and Dr. Kevorkian was released from prison. In other news, I moved in with my parents. I had somehow managed to graduate with a theater degree from Northwestern, but without a job or a trust fund, I had to choose between moving home and suffering the rancid fate of a nomadic couch surfer. This hadn't been anyone's original plan, and somewhere in the gap between the end of winter break and graduation, my parents had converted my childhood bedroom into a home theater. No one had mentioned it to me. They assumed I'd be just as thrilled as they were. They took down my map of the world, my kitschy chandelier, and the panel of Gustav Klimt wallpaper I had pasted above my bed. I smoothed all those air bubbles out with a sponge by hand, I told my mom when I saw what she'd done. The room was now nautical themed. The new wallpaper looked benign enough from far away, but if you got up close, you saw that it was patterned with cats wearing sailor caps. A small part of me threw up. There was a leather couch where my bed had been, and the shelves above held my parents' DVD collection, which consisted of romantic comedies from the early 90s and the Chuck Norris omnibus. "Did you think I would never come home?" I said. "Remember what you said when you were 14 or 15? You said that once you graduated college, you'd rather live in a car than live with us," she said, and left me alone in that room to grieve for lost objects. "I was kidding," I called after her, but she didn't come back. I didn't even own a car. I briefly imagined moving back to Evanston, walking to the lake, and throwing myself in. But how would I even get back to Evanston without a car? I moved my clothes and books into the guest room downstairs, which smelled like pumpkin spice potpourri year-round and was very close to the tree where the cicadas screamed at night. Was I jealous that Jack Kevorkian was free and I was not? Yes. Yes, I was. And so began my summer as an unemployed college graduate. My goal was to develop a chronic illness that would entitle me to monthly checks from the government, tender sympathy from my loved ones, and a good deal of time in bed with the collected work of Frances Hodgson Burnett. I've always been ambitious. I had my fingers crossed for a disease without a cure, but a mild one, nothing disfiguring or painful. Of all the plans I could have made for how to spend the rest of my life, this seemed the most desirable because it required the least of me. It was a form of surrender. My dad subscribed to Time and Newsweek, in addition to the Chicago Tribune, and he read on the train on the way to work. He read in his favorite armchair with a glass of Cabernet before dinner. He read in the bathroom. I didn't think this was just a healthy interest in current events. I recognized this as an addiction because it was one I shared. Around our house, the paranoia and sense of impending doom was escalating until finally the day came when my dad told me that he was going to have to start charging me rent to offset the cost of the home security system he had just ordered. "But you just turned my childhood bedroom into a cineplex," I said. "It increases the value of the home," my mom said. "But I don't have any money, remember? That's why I live with you." I had applied at Petco and Starbucks, but neither was hiring, so I made flyers to advertise my services as a dog walker. They remained in a stack on my desk. Whenever I looked at them, I either got lost in an invalid fantasy, or I thought, "Jesus, Esther, you were tested as gifted and talented in first grade. You were a lilac princess in the Lilac Parade, and you starred in a student film called Russian Bride Zombies from Hell. You shouldn't have to walk dogs or suffer from rheumatoid arthritis. Sofia Coppola should hire you as her personal assistant. You should get paid to update her website and remember to bring a bag of her favorite snack foods when you two have to fly to international film festivals together." "Esther, did you hear what I just said?" my mom said. "What?" I said, "Do you want to help me plant wildflowers in the front? I'll pay you $8 an hour." If by plant wildflowers you mean inherit $100,000 from a dead relative I've never met so that I can visit the catacombs in Paris, then yes, I said. My friend Tierney was abroad for the summer, on a trip financed by her grandmother as a graduation present. The last email she'd sent me was from Paris. The subject read, "Beaucoup de garçons." "Maybe you can get a job at the movie theater at the mall, and you can see movies for free," my dad said. "You like movies." He was making signs on our computer to print and post around the house that reminded me and my mom to lock the doors and windows. "How do I make this text all fit on one page? Do I click this white box with the magnifying glass?" "No," I said. "Stop. Let me do it." It only took 2 seconds, and he kept asking me to slow down so he could see what I was doing. I knew he wouldn't remember it anyway, so I didn't. "Isn't that something?" my mom said, putting on her reading glasses to watch over our shoulders. "Can you at least write down what you just did so I can do it again later if you're not home?" my dad said. "Maybe we could pay her to give us computer lessons, Paul." "You don't have to pay me. I'll write them down later." "Dad, can I borrow the car tonight?" "If you put on some pants," he said. I looked at my legs. I was only wearing the t-shirt I had worn to bed the night before. On the front, it had a picture of a gray wolf standing on a cliff, howling at a full moon. The moon was surrounded by silvery clouds coming out of a ghost-like woman's mouth. This was my so ugly it's awesome shirt, but my parents didn't appreciate that, even after I explained it to them. I poured myself a bowl of Cinnamon Toast Crunch for dinner and took it to my room, so I wouldn't have to sit at the table with my parents and talk about my plans. I had been rereading the books I loved as a child, mysteries and fantasies, books in which the heroines were orphans or runaways or Holocaust martyrs. I liked that even though they faced insurmountable obstacles, their objectives were always clear. Cereal in hand, I got into bed with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. 30 pages in, I started to fall asleep, but I had promised to hang out with my friend Pickle later, so to stay awake, I brought my laptop over from my desk and Googled images of baby pandas. Baby panda waving, baby panda at the playground, baby panda on a blue plastic basket. I should write a screenplay, I thought, about 4 baby pandas who go to stay with their uncle in the English countryside to hide from German bombers. One day they're playing hide-and-go-seek when the littlest panda finds this amazing portal to another world, but the other baby pandas don't believe her, and later they're filled with regret, because in the other world she enters into an indecent relationship with a much older panda, and they don't know how to bring her back. I'll do that, I thought. Later, I'll write a screenplay. I read an email from Shimon in Connecticut, who said she was having a fantastic time stage managing a production of Equus and was sleeping with an actor who played one of the horses. Melissa wrote to say she had decided to stay in Evanston for the summer and also wanted to let me know that her teenage brother got caught doing coke at space camp. All my girlfriends were having the times of their lives, like Jennifer Gray, pre-rhinoplasty. I took a Vicodin I found in the medicine cabinet, left over from when I had my wisdom teeth out, and tried to tame the wild shrubbery of my hair with gelatinous goop. 20 minutes later, I looked less Diana Ross, more mangy dog, a failure. I went back into the guest room and crawled around the floor of the closet, which was now filled with the salvaged wreckage of my former bedroom, looking for my favorite black shirt. It felt cool and dark in there, like the bottom of the ocean. I found a stack of Trapper Keepers from middle school, a pair of pink leg warmers, my collection of Little House on the Prairie and Beatrix Potter books, and a box of 64 crayons. I found the shirt and changed into it. Pants next. Then my phone made a noise and I crawled back to my bed to get it. There was a text message from Pickle that said he was off work and going over to Jack's and I should meet them. "Kay," I wrote back. But then, instead of standing up, I decided to see how long I could keep crawling. What if you couldn't walk, Esther? I thought. What if that was your affliction? I kneeled to turn off the light in my room, and then I crawled into the hallway, through the living room, and toward the front door. My dad was asleep on the couch with the TV on mute. Why did we own so many TVs? I couldn't understand it. I had to crawl past him to get to the staircase, where my purse was hanging over the banister, and I pretended I was a sand cat in the desert, stealthily hunting for lizards in the dark. "Esther?" My mom was standing at the top of the stairs, flossing her teeth. "Yes? Are you going out?" "I dropped something," I said. "I think I dropped something." "Okay, be safe," she said. "Do you have your keys?" "Be sure to lock behind you," my dad said, opening and closing his eyes like garage doors. He turned off the TV and resealed the bag of cookies on the coffee table. I stood and let myself out. Across the street, dusk was falling to the west behind the gas plant. Down came the first stars. The world seemed so safe and secure, but I knew that at any moment an asteroid could fall on us, or a bomb, summoned by our fear of it, and it wouldn't matter if we had locked our doors or not. Thousands of miles away, a bus could explode and destroy a mosque and a tourist from San Diego. A polar bear could drown, and a teenage girl could lose her feet in a roller coaster accident on the same exact day. You always heard people say, "I never thought it would happen to me." So my strategy was to think of it all. Terrorist attack, amusement park dismemberment, death by climate change, and use my grim imagination as a preventative measure in the face of the random universe. I kicked a cicada shell to the side of the driveway with my sandal and got in the car. The radio was playing that song about the guy who would walk 1,000 miles across the country for the girl. Everyone loved that song. I would put it on the Littlest Panda soundtrack. When I backed out of the driveway, I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. I was looking at the moths near our porch light. For a second, I thought they were snowflakes in June. And then I ran over the curb a little bit. I could see my dad at the window near the front door. I waved, he shook his head. I turned off the radio and drove west into the silent, encroaching darkness. And now I'm going to read a couple poems from my poetry collection, Dispatch from the Future. And the first one I'll read is based on a computer game I loved in the 90s called The Oregon Trail, which was a game you played as if you were traveling in a Conestoga wagon west, and you would load your wagon with supplies, and along the way you could go shoot bison with rifles, and maybe half your family would die, and you would bury them. You could write on their tombstones. And you could also keep a diary of your travels on the trail. So this poem is a woman's diary on the Oregon Trail. June 14th, 1848. Weather, hot. Health, fair. Dear diary, had to leave the baby behind because she wouldn't eat. Sent John out to shoot a buffalo, but he said they all looked so peaceful he couldn't bring himself to do it. Figures, we'll all be dead soon enough. Waiting for the Indian to get here so we can cross the river. June 15th, 1848. Weather, still hot. Health, same. Dear diary, Chastity's doll drowned. She wanted to dive in after it, but I reminded her that she doesn't know how to swim. Dove in anyway. Another one lost. John says he'll skin us a buffalo so we have something to eat, but only if the buffalo has recently died of natural causes. Get a grip, John, I told him. June 16th, wagon broke. Eating wild blackberries while we wait for another wagon party to come by and help. John has gone off on his own to meditate and ask forgiveness of the earth. Prudence might have dysentery. Figures. June 17th. Some days I feel like I'm just a character in a game played by a sick person who has sent me on this journey only to kill all my loved ones along the way. June 18th. Help came, but in the night they stole our oxen. Guess we'll just have to walk to Oregon now. Are you there, God? It's me, Mary Jane. Send me some oxen and a son who likes to shoot things. June 19th. Lost Prudence to dysentery. Should we eat her? Tough question. June 20th. Another river, you have got to be kidding. June 21st. Managed to swim across with diary on top of my head so it wouldn't get wet. John and I have found a tribe of Indians who will let us stay with them. At least, we think that's what they said. We don't speak their language. They seem to have indicated that tonight we must follow them, blindfolded, into a grove of trees, and in the addled darkness, our dead will return and speak to us. I'm going to read one more poem. This is called Based on a Book of the Same Title, and it was inspired both by the Choose Your Own Adventure series of books, as well as the film The Notebook. Based on a book of the same title. By definition of vicious infinite regression, I don't like to talk to philosophy majors. They have found the truth, and the truth is that there isn't one. So on Saturdays, they wear overalls and stare at their reflections and try to guess whose childhood was worse, But in the end, they realize they all share the same dream of having a reason to join the witness protection program, which disappoints at least one person who thought his dream was so uniquely his. Last night, I got a fortune cookie that said I don't get along with basically anyone. And from the back, I learned the Chinese word for grape, pu tao, and it made me wonder how each informs the other. To find out, turn to page 117. I wonder how much longer I can live here before I do something irresponsible like meet a teenage boy on a Ferris wheel in 1941, or lie in the street and watch the stoplights change from green to yellow, or sit on a porch swing at dusk and listen to Leaves of Grass read by someone who has just worked all day with his hands. Already on page 56, I love you so much I just want to steal your clothes when you're asleep and wash them. I want us to communicate telepathically until I am old and suffering from dementia and can't even remember I know how to play piano until a nurse tells me I do, and still I'll deny it until she puts my hands on the keys, and then there'll be Chopin so quickly as the light spills in the leaded windows and the lilies lean in closer. By definition of vicious infinite regression, I am in front of a mirror holding a copy of the movie based on the book you wrote, based on the parts of our life together that I no longer remember. And looking back at me is a woman holding a movie based on a book based on her life, and she wonders if the woman she sees wants to die as much as she does. I keep staring at this bruise on my leg and drawing a blank. Last night when you called, I told you I was happy, which was true, but thinking ahead, I could be unhappy too, if that's what you wanted. I could be any of a lot of things: a wrist, a ghost, a harbor, a rope. I could be the one who doesn't know the language. I could be the reason they take you first. I could be the last person to see you alive.
So welcome, Leigh.
Thank you.
Thanks for, you're living in New York now, so thanks for making time to come back and visit the college. I wanted to start with a kind of a big question. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to be a writer? I think I remember that you're also interested in acting along the way too.
I always wrote from childhood, but it never occurred to me that you could become a writer, that was a job you could do. So I was always writing stories, writing poems. I wrote plays in 3rd grade and performed them in front of the class. And my friend, Mark Brown, who's one of my oldest friends, he was always the only boy who would agree to be in these plays. And then but I was really passionate about acting, so I moved to New York when I was 19 to go to acting school. And during that year in acting school, I was cast in all these like dramatic love scenes, and I was crying all the time, and it was exhausting. And so I would come home to my dorm room at night and write short stories and post them on my blog. And I started reading a lot of novels. I read like every single Margaret Atwood novel. I would go to used bookstores, and they were like $1, so I would just buy all these Margaret Atwood novels. And I realized, that's what she does for a living. That's what she gets to do. And I think for me, it still is kind of like acting. Like I still get to make characters, I still get to write dialogue, and I think my training as an actress and reading so many plays has helped me as a writer, because I'm really interested in dialogue and how different people speak. Yeah. So that's when I was 19 is when I shifted from acting to writing, and shifted what I was pursuing.
But how did you actually become a writer? I mean, this is mysterious to me. So, like, you dropped out of high school, and you've done all these different kinds of things, but now you're 26 or 27, and you have a new novel out and a new collection of poetry out. Yeah. How did that 19 to 26, like, did you just teach yourself, or did you have, how did you do that? Yeah,
I've always been really ambitious, so it wasn't enough that I was writing poems. I wanted the poems published. I read books about how to get published. I read books about writing. Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott is my favorite writing book.
Shitty first drafts.
Right, right, because I always edit as I go. I'm a very slow writer, and I read her book, and she's like, just get it out, and I'm like, I can't, Anne, but I always hear her in my head. But so that year in acting school, I also had my first short story published. So that kind of sealed the deal for me. It was just in a small online magazine, but getting that kind of, it felt like I was being welcomed into the club, that I did have a talent, and I was posting some stories on my blog, and I started getting a following on my blog. And even this year in January when I went on my book tour, people that had read my blog, this was 8 or 9 years ago came to my reading and met me in person, and it was one of the most exciting things.
Wow, that's a great connection.
Yeah, so I was always really involved in an online community too, which is how I met other writers or learned about other journals, and that's a medium where you have to be writing. I mean, that's what it is. So I think that was really formative for me also.
So you are sort of self-taught. Were you in writing groups? Did you have readers that were important to you?
Yeah, I've been in writing groups outside of a school environment. One I found on Craigslist in New York that met in a bar. I had to submit a story to be accepted to the workshop, and my story that I wrote was about a babysitter. So babysitting is something that I've been writing about for a long time.
Right.
And I was accepted into the group. It was me, I was 20. It was me, like a literary agent, a writing professor, an MFA grad, and a magazine editor. So they were like out of my league, but that was a great thing for me because they really nurtured me and mentored me. So on one hand, I consider myself self-taught because I've read a lot and I've reread a lot trying to figure out how writing works. But I've also, all along the way, had these mentors who would read my work and give me feedback, which I think is like essential.
Anne Lamott talks about that, about reading like a writer. Do you find that you do that too, that you go back and read work for craft to try and figure out what are they doing, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My boyfriend teases me because I like, when I buy new books, I like sneak them into the house so he won't see how many books I keep bringing in. And he's like, you have to get rid of one book for every book you bring in. And it's like, no, I have to keep them. And he's like, but you've already read them. But it's like, no, I have to reread them. It's not enough to read it once.
Right.
The first time you're just, you want to know what happens.
Now you mentioned that your first short story was published in an online journal. Do you think, or do you find that, like, in the process of becoming a writer, that there's almost like rungs that you kind of try to publish in things that are not as difficult to get in, and then you kind of keep climbing up the rungs and getting wider exposure, that it's not an overnight thing?
I think so, absolutely, and especially if you have no connections. I mean, my parents aren't writers. I didn't know writers.
Yeah.
Only online. I started making friendships with people, and like poets, I would email them and say, I really like your work, and some of them became my friends. Because poetry is kind of a smaller club.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I had to. And then as I got into better journals, I would publish a poem in a journal that was more widely read, and then people would email me and solicit me. So it's kind of like, a spider web that
works out.
That's expanding.
Yeah.
And then by the time you've written a whole book and you're looking to get that published, you're looked at as someone who's already kind of put in the time.
Right.
It wasn't like you just decided one day to write a novel and like, will you publish it?
Yeah.
But
it's take you more seriously.
Yeah.
Right. So your novel, you grew up just down the street from here in Lombard, and your novel's kind of about the suburban culture, and it's about this person who I'm guessing a lot of your readers think is you, even though it's fiction.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how the novel came together, and the autobiographical part of it or not?
Well, in the novel, my main character, Esther, graduates from college and has to move back in with her parents and gets a babysitting job. That's the setup. And I chose that setup because I had just lived at home, and so that was a very familiar experience that I was interested in writing about. And but my story, I've lived in so many different places, and I've gone to all these different schools, and my own story is so confusing to other people who don't know me that I was like, what's the easiest way that I can start this book? Oh, she graduates from college. She has to move back home. But I was really interested in writing the babysitting story.
Okay.
And now that the book came out in 2012, it's hitting at this moment when a lot of young people are having to move back home, so it seems especially relevant. But back when I was living at home, that was like really weird. Everyone else was having these fabulous lives, and I was temping at a sump pump company, living, in my bedroom, living in my childhood bedroom. So, some of the reviews talk about me going to Northwestern, but I never went to Northwestern. My character went to Northwestern,
Right.
But I think because I am close to my main character, it's easy to conflate the two.
Right, because you're an actress, and because
Right, I was an
lived
actress,
at home and
yes.
grew up in that town and know this culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have people asked you, like Esther, the character is complex and round, and she kind of carries the novel, at least for me. In terms of like the plot and how you structured I think it might be interesting to students, like how did you go about like structuring that? Did it just fall together? Or, I mean, did you kind of discover the plot as you wrote it?
Yeah.
Start with the character and then went,
Yeah, I early on figured out that it was a triangle, that it was the Brown family who she babysits for. There's the mother, the father, and the 4-year-old she babysits. And Esther has a relationship with each of the members of the triangle.
Okay.
And before it was called the fallback plan, it used to be called What We Do When You're Not Here. So each set of characters were doing something that the other ones didn't know about.
Yeah.
But this title I thought it was a genius, and everyone else thought it was too long and so forgettable, except for my mom. Raymond Carver. But my mom was like, everyone will know what we did that other time when you weren't around. I'm like, that isn't even the title. So my editor's the one who came up with the title, The Fallback Plan, which I think is more memorable.
Right, and they want them short.
Right.
Yeah, marketable.
Right. But the plot kind of evolved organically. Like, I didn't know the ending. I wasn't really sure. I thought Esther was going to have a fling with the dad, and then as I got deeper into that, I realized, like, no, that doesn't make sense. Like, I didn't want it to be a book about an affair. I didn't want it to be a book about a young woman trying to find a boyfriend and then she gets a boyfriend. I didn't want it to be that book.
Right.
So I had to kind of let the characters tell me what they wanted to have happen to them.
Yeah, there's several subplots that are kind of threaded together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shift to poetry a little bit. So first, how did you, do you write both simultaneously, or, and what is writing poetry like opposed to writing fiction? Are you working on a novel and poetry simultaneously all the time, or how is it different?
Well, I started out writing poetry, I think, when I was 13, and I really loved the confessional poets like Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath, and I don't think I even understood their poems, but I just read them and I just felt like there's something in this that they know something that I also know, and what is it? But I want to read more. So poetry comes from a very emotional place for me, and it was always something I heard. Like, I would just get poems. It's like, I'm assuming this is how people write music who write music, that you just hear a line and you want to write it down. Whereas writing fiction or writing prose, I have to sit down and make myself write words. I set word goals for myself.
Like word counts?
Yeah, like I try to get 1,000 words a day.
Do you do that now?
Yeah, when I have writing days.
Yeah.
I don't do it every day, but when it's my writing day. But I also found that the more I write every day in a row, the more I write. Like, if I write one day a month, I don't write anything.
Yeah, the rhythm, right?
The rhythm, yeah.
And then you start to expect to do good things, and sometimes you do.
Yeah, and also, I think this is Joan Didion who said this, but she ended her day on a line that just as it was getting good, or ending at a place where she could pick up from the next day. So not finishing anything.
Right.
Because if you leave yourself some juicy part to start at the next day, it's easier to get going.
Right. Updike used to say that too.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a good, though it's hard to stop when you're doing well, because you think, maybe I won't write tomorrow.
Right. Well, it can take you 6 hours to get to that one moment where it's just starting to get good.
Yeah, right.
But then it's so much easier to start the next day.
So, I like Anne Sexton and I like Sylvia Plath. They're not the first poets I think of when I think of your poetry, which I also like very much. So your poetry is simultaneously kind of comedic and dark and spontaneous and associative. And are there other poets that have been important to you? And what is the process like? I mean, the piece you read about the Oregon Trail, where you're imagining being in the game 200 years later. I'm just curious if you know much about maybe it's mysterious, but I'm about your poetry process.
Well, I used to think when I was younger that I wanted to write these poems that would stand the test of time, Whitman, like Walt Whitman or something, that someone would read these in 200 years
Auden
and be like, this is timeless, this is about love or something. But then I realized, what am I surrounded with all the time? I'm going to the movies, I'm going on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm on Facebook more than I'm out looking at trees. Let's be honest. So why can't I use all that material in my poetry? Is that bad? Is that wrong? So I use a lot of pop culture.
Right.
And I know it's going to it's going to make my poems dated to people who don't get the references in the future. But it feels like I'm in this moment right now, and this is what I want to write about. So I draw from a lot of different sources. And I'm also, in the past year or two, I've been writing these reality TV poems where I watch reality TV shows, I write down the dialogue, and then I collage them into a poem.
Like the one about the Bachelorette?
I did the Bachelorette, I did the Bachelor, I do the Real Housewives.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for scripted shows. It works for certain reality shows. If it seems too scripted, it doesn't work.
But it may not be that short-lived, because like reality TV shows themselves are a cultural phenomenon. And so your poems may have life because of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think, don't you think reality TV shows in general are kind of revelatory of our culture? You know, that we all want to, we all are movie stars.
Sure, yeah, yeah. Everyone has a moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I think I derailed from your question about, my influences for poetry. I really like Bob Hickok, who I think is a Midwesterner. I think he's from Michigan now. He teaches at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I remember when the shootings happened.
He's a great poet.
Yeah.
And I've also, someone told me the term post-confessionalism, which I thought was interesting, where that my poems do feel very confessionalist to me. It feels like I'm telling all these secrets or something, but really I cover it all up in these like Greek myths or movies, or so it's it's
hidden.
Yeah.
So what would you, I always ask this question, so what kinds of things would you tell young writers or new writers or beginning writers about tips of the craft or ways to keep going, or what ideas do you tell young writers, you know, about inspiration, discipline, whatever?
Yeah, yeah. I think for inspiration, it's hard to try to do something completely new. And I feel like if you're starting out, think about what you're already passionate about or what you're already obsessed with. Because I wrote so many babysitting stories before I wrote this novel. Like babysitting was something I kept going back to. Which
you drawn from your experience, which is another part of it.
Yeah, that I drew from my experience. And also there has to be some kind of remove. I had a very intense babysitting experience, but it was 2 years before I started the novel. I've been babysitting since I was 12. And then I had this very intense experience that inspired the novel, but it happened 2 years before. So having a little distance, so thinking, what was I obsessed with when I was 13? Like, what did I really love, or what did I want to be? Because before the novel, I wrote a novella that was like a magic realism novella that takes place in Indonesia after a volcano erupts. Like, nothing could be farther from my life.
Yeah.
And it had some nice moments and some nice images. But I read it recently. It's like, I was like, I could edit this. I bet I could edit this. And I was just like, no, I can't. Like, it's unsalvageable.
Yeah.
So not everything you write is going to be perfect and amazing. You just have to keep writing. And some people say, I'm going to do this many hours a day. That works for some people. I find the word goal motivates me more. But I think my #1 tip would be finding your true love reader, which is finding that one person in your life who will read your work and give you constructive criticism that you can share work with.
So you said your one love reader.
True love, your true love reader.
Now, to me, that connotes someone who tells you you're wonderful. So, but you're saying that reader would also be a balance of affirmation and
because they have to like your work and see what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But they also have to be able to tell you, do this, do that.
Yeah, the balance, though, of affirmation and critique seems important, too.
Yeah, because when I started my novel, I had a true love reader. But my idea was going to be to tell the whole story in Esther's voice first, then in Amy's voice, then in Nate's voice, and do 3 different voices. And I turned in the Esther part. She loved it. And then I turned in the Amy part that I was starting, and she was like, you know what? She's like, you should just tell the story from Esther, because that's the voice that's really working. And that was such a huge, she was so right, and that was such a good thing for me to hear.
Because you were going to tell it from a 4-year-old perspective, too. Was she 4?
Amy, the mother.
I was going to say, God, Amy.
May, yeah.
That would be hard from the 4-year-olds. Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
I can see doing it from Amy's too, shifting. But I think it'd have to be longer.
Yes, no, it would have to be
because it takes so
longer.
long to establish that point
Yeah.
of view and to make it believable.
Yeah,
Huh. But she gave you good advice, it sounds
yeah,
like.
yeah.
Okay. Any other little tidbits?
Tidbits.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Discipline?
said this in the class earlier, and they seemed to like it. I was really stuck on the ending. I didn't know how it was going to end, and I kept trying to figure it out, and I couldn't figure it out. And I met my friend Kendra for a drink, and I was so frustrated. And she said, "Why don't you just fantasize about it?" And that put such a positive spin on it that I just why don't I just daydream about my characters? And that helped me so much because I was trying to go at it from such like I was putting together a chair or something.
Yeah, or a puzzle, yeah.
Yeah, but really it's like, what do the characters want to do? What do I see them doing?
Just loosen up a little bit.
Yeah,
Try to
yeah.
shoehorn them into a role.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for coming
you.
in. That's all the questions that I have.
That's good.
And
That's good.
I wish you well in your future travels and
Thank you.
look forward to reading your next book.
Thank you very much.